Welcome to the Ripples of Perception series. I'm Lisa Hayes.
I'm Iva Nasr.
We're so excited you're here joining us because just as casting a pebble into a pond creates ripples, so do we as we go through life.
Please stay with us through the series as Lisa and myself, in each segment, share a variety of stories, downloads, and experiences that enrich our understanding of perception.
Are you ready to get started?
More than ready. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Iva.
This is what's on my mind today as an inspiration, once again, of a conversation we were just having. It's been a good number of years, I would say at least 15, 16 years ago, when I decided to introduce myself publicly in a very different way than what I had been using as an introduction. So this is what triggered the turning point about 15 years ago. I was still living in North Carolina in the mountains, and I was part of, not a member, but I was part of the Unitarian church community at the time. And I was invited to speak on Easter Sunday. So in the preparation process, which part of it is introduction of who I am, I decided this time I wasn't going to use part of my introduction as I am a child of war, which the truth is, am a child of war, but that's not all who I am, obviously. It was such a turning point. It was radical because words matter. Words are powerful. Identities, who we think we are and what we are, is a significant part of how we ripple into our lives, right? So anyway, so that was a turning point for me, and I can go into more detail if you'd like.
I think that this is a big issue for all of us from the standpoint of identities in the past and how we move forward with these ingrained concepts of ourselves, how it's a huge part of our past that maybe we don't want to let go of for whatever reason, even if it doesn't serve us.
And there are things we go through in life, whether they're very joyful moments or very sad, very traumatizing. I mean, no matter what the circumstance might be, there are some things that happen in our past, especially in our childhood years, that do dominate our conscious awareness for a long time. Life, universe always show up to give us opportunities, both to reinforce those patterns or to step out of them, or at least to sift through them and take pieces that might still be beneficial to work into a vision of who we are and who we are becoming. Sometimes we have a clear idea of who we want to be or more of, but sometimes we don't. And all it takes is the allowance to allow a shape shifting of our past to influence the moment, and then becoming more present in the moment more easily than inspires a future. And here we are putting it in a very linear timeline, which that has a place in the midst of our multidimensional parallel reality existence. I think right now I feel like we're focusing on that linear approach in this conversation.
Yes, and that's what we're familiar with. So I think it's appropriate. I love your terminology, shape shifting our identity of the past, what we identified with, and going forward with creating a new perception of our identity or what we've identified with, patterns that we've identified with in the past. We can shapeshift. I love that.
So here we are. I can tell our eyes are growing as we're looking at each other and talking.
We're on to something here, Iva.
This is really beautiful. How organic and how flowing these insights are when we start talking with inherent clarity and this devotion to authenticity and just truth telling, Lisa. Like all we need to do in life, in our relationships, period, is to bring this openness and just this willingness to be ourselves, the willingness and the courage, and then to surround ourselves with people and things that allow for this shape shifting. Ultimately, it's up to us as an individual. It's up to me to choose, to make that choice, to choose to change, to choose. It does make it easier, however, when there is a support system. So that is a little bit of a tangent. Going back to what I was talking about with my example, what came to me a minute ago is that whether it's deliberate or ends up just happening, ritual and ceremony around a moment when we are choosing to shape shift an identity or a memory, or to completely let go of one and introduce another one, no matter what the combination is, ritualizing the moment, I guess, empowers the intention. And this just came to me because I was going to start telling exactly what happened around that time 15 plus years ago when I decided moving forward, whether it's making a new friend or when I was speaking publicly, that I wasn't going to say, "Hi, my name is Iva, and I grew up in a war." Because for so many times when I would be in a context where I was speaking publicly or whatever the theme was of that event or gathering, somehow it was just a natural thing because it's a big part of what I knew myself to be, not exclusively, but it dominated. It dominated my sense of self and who I am relative to the world around me. So when I decided that I was no longer going to use that as at least the initial part of the introduction, I felt an immediate relief. And guess what came with the relief? Disorientation. Because what am I? Who am I? What fills in that blank? So the part of me who is the channel, the seer, the wizard. I don't want to get too hung up right now on titles, but that aspect of myself, which also took equal courage to, one took courage to not say anymore, and the other took courage to say more of. So, hi, my name is Iva. I'm a wizard, didn't quite put it in those words. Okay, so that was the change. So when I was preparing for that talk or that sermon, if you want to call it, back on that Easter Sunday, I found myself making one of my typical drives to Grandfather Mountain. This is in the Boone, North Carolina area. And I climbed up to my favorite peak and I cradled myself in the rocks and I looked up at the heavens and watched the birds circling, and that's where and how I made that decision to never again identify with War of Child. So I ended up ritualizing it without even having a clear intention to do that. So Ritual, I feel, is important in those moments as well.
It's almost as if like the neurons of a cell are moving around, and by ritualizing it, you stopped it, you put it in place, and it became much more of a concrete new identity for you. You shape shifted into it. And, just like a snake sheds its skin over and over again, the snake doesn't seem bothered by letting go of the old skin. However, so many of us, me included, do we really want to let go of that old identity, that old skin, and shape shift into something else?
And life, universe, guides, whatever speaks to you, intervene and actually ritualize a process for you. And I'm thinking specifically of you, Lisa, of the many stories you've shared with me and how you went through a change of identity from the past, of who you were predominantly, and how sometimes even when you didn't realize you knew, for example, how to meditate, or that there would be an experience where you had an out-of-body experience, there was something that ritualized. So I want you to kind of parallel my story about letting go of identity of war child with something that speaks to you on topic.
Okay. Yeah, we talked a little bit before the podcast about, does the past dictate the future? Do past identities or identifying with past patterns dictate the present or the future, or what we want to be going forward? And just now talking about it, it's hard sometimes to let go of the past or a past identity, because who are we when we do that? You mentioned a little bit of disorientation, or I can't remember the exact word. I think it was disorientation.
Yeah, I think I did say that. Yeah.
It letting go of the old skin, now being vulnerable to this new skin and what it's going to be exposed to, is maybe a little fearful. So when we look back at our life and determine that we had a past identity that we no longer have, how did we come about that? I look back, and I know the listeners might have heard me say in previous podcasts with you that I had a 35-year lobbying and lawyering career at the Indiana State House. My dad was a politician, a state representative. I identified with politics. I identified with law. I identified with legislation. I identified with the whole persona of being immersed in the state house with all those people there. It was like that was my only world. Mm-hmm. And to emerge from that, kind of like the butterfly from the chrysalis, into a new identity, it was almost like jumping off the cliff. However, it didn't seem as abrupt as that, because I segued into my new identity that I feel like serves me much better more slowly. It was almost as if I orchestrated it, because I felt a newness coming way before it did. I remember thinking, maybe 10 years before I actually let go of my lawyering and lobbying, which was at the end of 2016, January 1, 2017, I remember thinking something is amiss. I thought maybe 8 years before that, I don't see myself lobbying and lawyering after a certain time in my life, which later, I was thinking, okay, I didn't see myself lobbying and lawyering at the age of 60. I'll be identifying now with my age, of which I turned 60 at the end of 2016. And by gosh, by golly, when the session started in January of 2017, I wasn't lobbying. I saw that as almost a prophetic vision 8 years or so before. And then 3 years before I actually retired, I started to see it more clearly and I started to prepare emotionally. And then 6 months before the end of 2016, I actually told my clients.
What was the desire, though, that started that prophetic vision? What were you tired of? What were you ready for? Like what started shifting for you? What were you not enough of, maybe at the time, that you might have wanted to be more of?
I felt completely constrained in that I felt my real self, my true self, my pure and true self, because we talked about being ourselves, you mentioned that, was constrained in the walls of that state house. I loved to communicate. I loved to intellectually solve puzzles and prepare strategy. I loved all that. However, it was all dictated by a script that no longer served me. It was dictated by what the clients wanted, what the legislators wanted. I couldn't communicate what I felt, what I wanted. I had to communicate what the system required me to communicate. So it was like I wanted to get out of that box and be free to develop into something new and different, which I wasn't sure what it was going to be.
So I remember when I decided to introduce myself differently, truthfully, yet differently, it redirects a conversation right away. I mean, obviously, if I was meeting you for the first time today, and I say, "Hi, Lisa, my name is Iva, and I grew up in a war." What comes to you to ask me next? Or what images and imprints are immediately impressed upon you? Versus when I say, "Hi, guess what? I have a feeling you can relate to this. I'm a shapeshifter and I'm a magician and I'm a miracle worker."
Yeah. I don't see you as a victim of war, just like I don't see myself anymore as a lawyer or a lobbyist. How does that happen? I see you as a wizard, as a shaman, as a magician, as a miracle worker. That's how I see you today. I don't see you tied to that old identity.
Well, a little bit of a hot mess every now and then, but that's not the conversation though right now, is it?
I love our conversation right now. Our conversation right now is it's possible to shed those skins. It's possible to shapeshift into our more pure and true identity of ourselves.
And it doesn't imply always, sometimes, but not always, a complete abandonment of that old skin or truth or identity, because we're not implying that our past and what guided our experience in life, like the reference to child of war. And it brings me, I feel tears welling up. They're tears of memories and tears of joy, because there was a level of empathy and depth and so many other qualities that were exaggerated in me by going through that identity. And those are things that I also basically continued, like sifted through, borrowed, like you said earlier about your love for communication and strategy and resolving things. So I agree that this is not about aborting. This is about allowing the complete inheritance of that DNA, of those codes, of what we're born into for whatever reason, whether by choice or not. I mean, again, topic within topic in all of this. It's not a complete abandonment. Sometimes it's important to completely let go, but most of the time, the comfort and the ease come in knowing that you can still borrow and continue and then embellish.
Especially the wisdom, and knowing that we can borrow the wisdom, remember what we gathered from all those experiences in our past, and bring them into the future to serve us to the highest and best good of ourselves and all, while not allowing it to necessarily dictate what we do in the present or what we could do in the future.
So how did at least the example of communication and strategy and that kind of passion to solve things, how did that carry into who you are today? How would you describe yourself today?
Well, I love to talk.
Really?
I know.
Are we a good match?
And I knew how much I loved to talk because back in 2012, when I started to get inklings that I needed to leave the legislature, I actually formed my website, Dreams for Society, Imagine, Visualize, and Create, and started to talk on that, started to interview people. And so it was clearly a maybe shedding a skin of lots of things, but keeping the skin of communication and allowing that to better serve me, that was more in alignment with our pure and true nature of love and compassion and understanding, rather than at the State House, it was communication of competition and not really coming together. It was more black and white, like I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm going to win and you're going to lose. That's what I had to remove myself from.
Well, and here you are hosting this podcast, as we call it, of Ripples of Perception on your YouTube channel. I do not take this gift for granted one bit. And so you have continued. You're just lobbying in a very different way now. Yes, it's really beautiful. And I'm not sure how much more we need to impress with this topic.
Except that, Iva, the fact that you 15, 16 years ago became aware of how you introduced yourself. And we started out with your idea of shape shifting vis-a-vis by reintroducing the concept of how do I want to present myself to the audience? Do I want to present myself as a creator of my future? Or do I want to present myself as burdened by the past, as a victim of war?
And of course, it goes without saying that I'm first in line to have complete empathy and complete ability to identify with any current victim of war, whether it's a war on the outside of the home or within a home, but just that. And I do also have a lot of empathy and compassion and desire to help anyone who is ready for a shift of circumstance that isn't always easy, yet very possible, no matter what the circumstance is of our lives, of our past. no matter what. And I can say this confidently, not only because I have experienced the many, many, many phenomenal, joyful, and miraculous side of life, also because I have that direct ability to say, well, my situation might not be exactly like yours, but boy, do I know what it feels like as a child to confront violence and death and that kind of conflict. So that's another benefit that comes in not completely letting go of where we were, in order not just to free ourselves and to be who we are and what we are willing to become more of, always bringing others along with us.
It's funny, when I just thought of the State House, it could have been depicted somewhat as similar to your experience as a possible war, because everyone was fighting with each other on the different issues. It's a very traumatic and dramatic thing to let go of, and we have to come to peace with all the players that we might have blamed for our victimhood of being part of that situation. In your case, a true war, very, very dramatic, where you heard the bombs and you were in bomb shelters. And my situation, where I was participating in a political war, in effect, day in and day out. How do we get out of that? We have to let go of the resentment or the blame. Because if we do, we have to also become aware that by letting go of that, the hate of all that, the blame, that we no longer can seek revenge. I mean, I'm sure you're not interested in going to the perpetrators of the war and seeking revenge any longer, because you've let go of being a victim. So you're no longer interested in going after the perpetrator.
Quite the opposite, actually. The letting go process and this really immense and pure intention to forgive and move on is a journey in and of itself, and it will continue to confront us with layers, including some of the things I have shared with you lately, Lisa, and what you've been helping me with, that you can simultaneously have the intention and initiate and ritualize the process of shape shifting, and to continue to show up and continually infuse the new and let go of the past. And this is, I mean, I feel I'm about to fall out of my chair, because you and I are experiencing, as we speak, another revolution, another resurrection, another infusion of this alchemy, the spiral of change. This is where we can start saying it's not just a linear timeline, because there's a swirl of all possibilities happening in every moment on this linear path.
And the ripples are permeating through all parallel realities. And I had so much energy surging through me while you were wrapping this up. I almost imploded.
I know. I'm still feeling the reverberation of something so significant that words cannot express right now. And it's part of the reason sometimes that I do slow down and feel like I want to be more deliberate with my words, because how do you put words to the essence of this message and reminder that we are sharing today?
I'll tell you one example I want to leave the listeners with that I've been thinking about during this conversation. And that is when we let go of the blame around our situation, that we're this because of them or because of that. It's similar to the idea of no longer needing, in the case of the war, no longer needing to keep any war memorials. There's no need when we completely de-identify with the blame around all of that. We no longer have to memorialize it. It no longer becomes an issue in the present or the future.
You know what? My dear friend Jim, rest his soul, literally is sitting between us right now, because I watched this glorious human being navigate the worst of experiences and memories of having gone through the Vietnam War, 2 or more calls of duty, with horrendous experiences, and watched him transform and dedicate himself and his consciousness to literally, it's like I watched him reincarnate 3 times in the short few years that I had the privilege of being his friend in this earthly existence before he passed away little over a year and a half ago. I don't need to say much more, except that even if my transformation and my story, even if growing up in the war was still embellished with enough love and luxury and other things that I was experiencing as a child in a loving family and so on and so forth, amazing education. So even if my story isn't the worst of the worst, and even if your story isn't the worst of the worst, although they're both very valid and very significant, I know that there's an example of someone else like Jim and so many others to say that even if it gets 100 times worse, there's always a choice. There's always a place to just decide to shapeshift and then watch the synchronicities, watch the earth angels come in, watch things unfold. I feel like now my message is not just about shape shifting, but emphasizing no matter what you've been through or no matter what you're going through now, I have the audacity and the grace to invite everyone to make a change.
So what we're inviting you to do, listeners, as well as inviting ourselves, is to shape shift the ripples of perception. The past does not need to dictate how everything will ripple out into our perceived reality in the now or in the future.
And even if the past does dictate, there are other dimensions to the past, invoking new ripples from the past that could be of benefit.
Love it. Woo! All right. To be continued?
Always to be continued.